Madam President, over the last few weeks, for obvious reasons, there has been increased focus on the state of our economy.
Quorum call.
I would move that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, during the last several weeks and months, in fact, there has been increased discussion and comments about the state of our economy. As you know, last month, our nation actually shed some 17,000 jobs. And many economists tell us we are now in a recession, and that is certainly true for some parts of this country. The House, the Senate, and the White House are wrestling with an economic stimulus package, and President Bush has just presented his new budget. This week, the director of the OMB and the Secretary of the Treasury will come before the Senate Budget Committee to discuss their views on the economy. Madam President, let me begin by stating how dismayed I was by the budget that President Bush has provided us just today. Frankly, this budget is unconscionable and reflects priorities that are almost impossible to comprehend. While providing hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks for the wealthiest 0.3% of our population over the next decade, this president has proposed major cuts in health care, LIHEAP, weatherization, nutrition, housing programs, and other basic needs for moderate and low-income people. This is a Robin Hood in reverse budget. This is a budget that takes from the poor and working families, those most in need, and gives to millionaires and billionaires, those least in need. This proposed budget tells us just how out of touch this president and his administration are with the needs of the American people. And let me be very clear, as a member of the Senate Budget Committee, I will do everything I can to make sure that Bush's budget is rejected and that we bring forth a new budget that reflects the priorities of all of our people and not just the wealthiest and most powerful. Madam President, most Americans understand, for example, that our health care system is disintegrating. Since George W. Bush has been president, 8.6 million Americans have lost their health insurance, and we now live in a country in which 47 million of our neighbors have no health insurance at all. We live at a time when health costs are soaring, when people are paying larger and larger deductibles and co-payments. That is the reality of American health care today. And how does President Bush respond to this crisis in health care? Well, his response is to slash funding for Medicare, slash funding for Medicaid, slash funding for rural health care programs, making a terrible situation even worse. Now, I understand that it would be asking too much for this president to stand up to the insurance companies, to stand up to the drug companies, and move us toward a national health care program which guarantees health care for all of our people. Something, by the way, which every other major country on earth now has. Now, I understand that that is something that George W. Bush is not going to do. I understand that. But at the very least, at a time when some 17,000 Americans a year die because they lack health insurance, he shouldn't be making a terrible situation even worse. He needn't deny health care to even more Americans. Madam President, in the state of Vermont and through many parts of our country, Minnesota included, We have experienced extremely cold weather this winter. At the same time, as every American knows, the price of home heating oil has more than doubled, skyrocketing, since President Bush has been in office. The result is that the LIHEAP program, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which keeps millions of seniors and low-income households warm in the winter, is stretched to the breaking point. That's the reality. Cold winter, price of home heating oil soaring, program is stretched. In state after state, because of soaring fuel prices, either fewer people are able to access LIHEAP or the amount of help that they are getting has been significantly reduced. That's simply the arithmetic of the situation. Lower payments, fewer people. Those are the choices that states have with reduced LIHEAP budgets. Now, I know that President Bush has no problem whatsoever with the fact that his good pals at ExxonMobil have just announced the largest profits in the history of the world for the third consecutive year. Over $40 billion in profit in the year 2007. Now, I'm quite sure the President has no problem with that, and I understand that. He has no problem, apparently, with the fact that home heating oil prices are now at $3.30 a gallon. I'm sure he has no problems with the fact that just a few years ago, the former CEO of ExxonMobil, a gentleman named Lee Raymond, received a $400 million retirement package from that company. Not a problem for the President of the United States. He's close to those people. As he once famously said, that is his base. But despite the President's lack of concern about rising fuel costs, it really is beyond comprehension that he would slash the LIHEAP program by $570 million, a 22% reduction from last year. The price of home heating oil is soaring. More and more people are losing their LIHEAP benefits, and the President's response in the midst of this crisis is to slash the program. Slash the program. That, Mr. President, is pretty cruel. What is a low-income senior living on Social Security supposed to do when the weather gets below zero and she can't heat her home? That's the story today, and you propose to make it even worse next year. Madam President, at a time when millions of low-income seniors are struggling to survive on inadequate Social Security benefits, this President, in his budget, wants to cut back on nutrition programs for low-income seniors, in addition to cutting back on low-income housing and senior citizen housing. Madam President, hunger in the United States of America is increasing. Emergency food shelves are simply running out of groceries. There is no moral justification for the President of the United States to be cutting back on nutrition programs for low-income elderly Americans by proposing to completely eliminate the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which is providing assistance to well over 4,000 low-income senior citizens in the state of Vermont and hundreds of thousands nationally. Hunger going up, President cuts back on an important program, nutrition program, for low-income seniors. Madam President, I am a member of the Veterans Committee, and I am proud that last year, against opposition from the White House, we substantially increased funding for the VA and are providing billions more so that veterans can gain access to quality VA hospitals and clinics. That's what we accomplished. That was the right thing to do. And yet, despite all of his rhetoric about how much he loves the troops and how much he respects the troops, and just last week, I might add, in his State of the Union address, President Bush said, and I quote, "We must keep faith with all who have risked life and limb so that we might live in freedom and peace," end quote. That was the president's statement 1 week ago at the State of the Union address. But today, after all that flowery rhetoric, the president has proposed in his budget a very sharp increase in health care fees from $250 to $750 for veterans who access VA health care facilities. And there is no question, no doubt about it, but that these increased fees, if put into effect, would result in driving many veterans out of VA health care, which in fact is precisely the goal of that proposal. He wants to take veterans out of VA health care, which is consistent with what the president did several years ago when he threw large numbers of so-called Category 8 veterans, those without service-connected disabilities, out of VA health care. So the words tell us how much he loves our soldiers, but actions tell us that he is prepared to raise fees for veterans' health care with the result of removing many veterans from the VA system. I say to President Bush that in a time when tens of thousands of our soldiers have been wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan, please don't balance your budget on the backs of men and women who have put their lives on the line defending this country. Madam President, since George W. Bush has been in office, we have seen record-breaking deficits, and our national debt is now $9.2 trillion, $3 trillion more than when President Bush assumed office. All of us in Congress want to move this country toward a balanced budget to make sure that our kids and our grandchildren are not left with an enormous, enormous debt. But, Madam President, there are right ways to move toward a balanced budget, and there are wrong ways to try to do that. And unfortunately, President Bush's budget moves us exactly in the wrong direction. Madam President, as many Americans know, since President Bush has been in the White House, the middle class has been decimated, poverty has increased, and the gap between the very wealthiest people in our society and everyone else has grown wider. In fact, the United States now has, by far, the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. Sadly, the gap between the upper income people, the wealthiest people in our country, and the middle class is increasingly making our country look like a poor developing country. We have the same economic structure in terms of distribution of wealth and income that countries like Brazil and Mexico have, rather than looking like other major industrialized countries in Europe, Scandinavia, or in Canada. Madam President, I am aware that a lot of facts and figures are thrown about on the floor of the Senate. But let me mention one fact that I hope all Americans pay attention to. And that is that according to the latest statistics available, the wealthiest 300,000 Americans, that's men, women, and children, take in more income than the bottom 150 million Americans. In other words, the upper 1/10 of 1%, 300,000 people, take in more money than do the bottom 50%. 1/10 of 1%, 50%. And that is what is going on in the American economy today. And, Madam President, tragically, that gap between the super rich and everybody else is growing wider and wider every single year. Madam President, for those people who live in the bottom 90% of the population, the vast majority of our citizens, their average income was $33,000 way back in 1973. And today, despite all of the free trade agreements and globalization, despite all of the huge increases in technology, despite the significant growth in worker productivity, in inflation accounted for dollars, that $33,000 a year has declined to $29,000 a year, which is about a $75 a week pay cut. That is what is going on in the economy today and has been going on over the last 3 decades. People on top doing phenomenally well. People at the bottom, situation getting worse. People in the middle getting squeezed, working longer hours for lower wages. And perhaps those trends tell us why in today's Washington Post, a front-page story was headlined, quote, "U.S. concern over economy is highest in years." That was the headline, front page, Washington Post today. And the first line of that story tells us that the public views the national economy now more negatively than at any point in nearly 15 years. And what is going on is that the American people are getting sick and tired. They're getting sick and tired of paying $3.15 for a gallon of gas when ExxonMobil enjoys the highest profits in the history of the world. They are tired of paying outrageously high home heating costs. They are tired of losing their health insurance. They are tired of losing their pensions. They are tired of not being able to find affordable child care for their kids. They are tired of seeing their kids come out of college $20,000 or $30,000 in debt and not able to find decent paying jobs. And not only are they tired, they are worried. They are worried that for the first time in the modern history of this great country, despite the fact that so many people are working so hard, they are worried that their kids will have a lower standard of living than they do. They are worried that the American dream, which is what this country has always been about, the dream which says that if parents work hard, their kids will do better than they do. They are worried that that dream is being lost. And that is why there is so much deep concern about the economy. And it's not just health care, and it's not just the loss of pensions, and it's not only outrageously high prices when you fill up your car, and it's not only home heating oil. It's the fact that when you go shopping, what you're doing is buying products made in China and Mexico that used to be made in the United States. And the American people understand that you're never going to have a great economy if we're not producing the products that we need and that people throughout the world need. The American people understand that there's something profoundly wrong when 25 years ago, the largest employer in the United States was General Motors, manufacturer of cars that paid workers good wages, good benefits. There was a strong union. And today, the largest employer in the United States is Walmart. Low wages, minimal benefits, and vehemently anti-union. And the American people are getting the point that people like President Bush work tirelessly on behalf of the wealthy and the powerful, and who is standing up for the people who make our country go every day, for the cops and the firemen and the farmers and the people who work in factories and the nurses and the doctors. Who is standing up for those people? And maybe, Madam President, the time is now for us to begin standing up for those people. But in the midst of all of this, the President has brought forth a budget that punishes working people, punishes poor people, but says to the wealthiest people in this country, the people who have not had it so good since the late 1920s, what he says to them is, hey, I, the President, am going to help you. So in his budget, the President wants to repeal the estate tax, which would provide $1 trillion in tax relief to the wealthiest 0.3%. Let me say that again. Over a 20-year period, $1 trillion in tax relief to the wealthiest 0.3% of our population. And that is what this budget, this Robin Hood in reverse budget, is all about. If you're old and trying to survive on Social Security, and if you're going to go cold this winter and next winter, the President wants to cut back on the heating assistance that you receive. If you are a low-income American, or perhaps an American without any health insurance right now, the President wants to cut back on Medicaid and Medicare. If you are an American who lives in a home that lacks insulation, and if you're putting money into your heating bill and that heat is going out, your poorly insulated home is going out the windows, going out the roof, you have a President who wants to completely eliminate the low-income weather assistance program. And if you are a veteran who has put your life on the line defending this country, the President wants to make it harder for you to access VA health care by substantially increasing your fees. But if you are a billionaire, the President is all there for you. If you are one of the wealthiest families in America, in this budget that the President has brought forth today, you are going to get huge tax breaks. And let me, Madam President, just cite one example of how preposterous this scenario is. One of the wealthiest families in America is the Walton family. The Walton family, as I think most people know, owns Walmart. This one family is worth, it is estimated, a combined $82 billion. There are a number of sons and daughters. Combined, they're worth about $82 billion, one family. Madam President, incredible as it may sound, under the President's proposal of completely eliminating the estate tax, that one family would receive over $30 billion in tax breaks. So here we are. If you're old can't afford to heat your homes, we're going to cut the program that keeps you warm. If you're sick and you have no health insurance, we're going to cut the program that gives you access to a doctor. If you're living in a home where you're losing all kinds of heat through poor insulation, we're not going to help you. If you are a veteran who has served your country, we're going to raise fees for you to get into a VA hospital or a clinic. But if you are one of the wealthiest families in America, we're going to give you $30 billion in tax breaks. I say this without glee, but President Bush will probably go down in history as one of the least popular presidents this country has ever had. And you don't need to know anything more to understand why that is so. A president who would give hundreds of billions in tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires and then cut back on the needs of working families, senior citizens, veterans, is not a president who is representing the vast majority of our people. Madam President, I will do everything that I can as a member of the Budget Committee, not only to make sure that President Bush's budget is not implemented, but I will work with my colleagues to fashion a budget that begins to address the real needs of the American people. There is great disenchantment in this country about what's going on here in Washington, but I also know there is great hope out there. There is a belief that if we come together as a people, if we remember where we came from, if we are prepared to uphold the values that have made us a great country, if we are willing to stand up to the powerful special interests who have so much influence over what goes on in this institution, if we can do those things, not only can we once again create a great middle class, not only can we once again protect the most vulnerable people in our society, but perhaps more importantly, we can once again give the American people a faith in their government that they presently lack. And that is something we must do. Thank you very much, Madam President. I yield back the floor. Madam President,
Senator from Vermont.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair appoints the following conferees.
The conferees to H.R. 2419. Senators Harkin, Leahy, Conrad, Baucus, Lincoln, Stabenow, Chambliss, Lugar, Cochran, Roberts, and Grassley.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 556S550.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 556, S550, a bill to preserve existing judgeships on the Superior Court of the District of Columbia.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed. The motion to reconsider be laid upon the table, and any statements related to the bill be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Rules Committee be discharged from further consideration of S.J. Res. 25 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
Senate Joint Resolution 25, providing for the appointment of John W. McCarter as a citizen regent of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the joint resolution be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to the joint resolution be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S. Res. 441, submitted earlier today by Senator Schumer.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 441, congratulating the New York Giants on their victory in Super Bowl 42.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.